November 25, 1988. Misato, Japan. A suburb of Tokyo, a 17-year-old girl is walking home from her part-time job. It's around 8 p.m. She's just finished her shift at a plastics factory. She's saving money for graduation. Her name is Junko Furuta. She's a good student. Popular. Kind. She works hard. She's never been in trouble. In a few months, she'll graduate high school. She has plans. A future. She'll never make it home. 4 teenage boys are waiting for her. They've been planning this. Watching her routine. Learning her schedule, one of them knocks her off her bicycle. She falls. Confused. Hurt, another boy, pretending to be a concerned stranger, helps her up. Are you okay? Let me walk you to safety. She trusts him. They lead her to a warehouse. And then, they reveal who they really are. For the next 44 days, Junko Furuta will be held captive in a house in Adachi, Tokyo, not in a secret basement. Not in a hidden location, in a house. With a family living upstairs. In a residential neighborhood. With neighbors on all sides, over 100 people will know she's there. The boys will bring friends to see her. To assault her. They'll brag about what they're doing. Their parents will know. They'll see her. They'll hear her screaming. Neighbors will hear the screams. The sounds of violence. They'll know something is wrong, and not one person will call the police. Not one, for 44 days. On January 4, 1989, Junko Furuta will die. She'll be 17 years old. Her body will be found in a concrete-filled drum, discarded on a construction site. The 4 boys who killed her will be arrested. Tried. Convicted, and they'll receive sentences so light, so shockingly inadequate, that it will spark national outrage and change Japanese law forever. Today, all 4 are free. Living under new identities. One has already re-offended. This is the story of Junko Furuta. The 44 days that shocked Japan. And how justice failed in the most horrifying way imaginable. Welcome to Case Unknown, where we investigate the crimes that changed nations, the cases that exposed hidden evils, and the stories that demand to be told. I'm your guide through the darkest chapters of true crime. In our previous episodes, we've seen technology expose criminals, DNA catch killers, and legal systems struggle with new crimes. Today, we explore something different. Something harder to understand, not how we catch evil, but how we fail to stop it. Even when everyone knows it's happening, this is the Junko Furuta case. A case that forced Japan to confront uncomfortable truths about its justice system, its culture of silence, and the price of looking away. This episode is dedicated to Junko's memory. And to the question we must ask, how do over 100 people know, and do nothing? Before we continue, this is the most difficult case we've covered. It involves the kidnapping, torture, and murder of a teenage girl. We will discuss the facts necessary to understand why this case matters, but we will not be gratuitous. We will focus on the investigation, the legal failures, and the societal failures that allowed this to happen. If you need to step away, please do. Resources for trauma support are in the description. This case involves a child victim. We tell her story with the utmost respect for her memory and her family's grief. To understand this case, you need to know who Junko Furuta was. She was born January 18, 1971, in Misato, Saitama Prefecture, Japan. A suburb northeast of Tokyo. By all accounts, she was a model student and daughter. She attended Yashiominami High School. She was in her 3rd and final year. 17 years old. Graduation just months away. Her teachers described her as diligent. Her classmates described her as kind. She was popular but not arrogant. She helped others. She was respectful. She worked part-time at a plastics factory to save money. Not because her family was struggling, but because she wanted to contribute. To be independent. She loved music. She had dreams of working in the music industry after graduation. Maybe as a manager. maybe in production. She hadn't decided yet. She was, in every way, an ordinary teenage girl with an ordinary life and ordinary dreams. On November 25, 1988, she finished her shift at the factory around 8 p.m. She said goodbye to her coworkers, got on her bicycle, started riding home. It was a route she'd taken hundreds of times. Safe. Familiar. A 20-minute ride through suburban streets. She never arrived. When Junko didn't come home, her parents immediately knew something was wrong. She was never late. She always called if there was a delay. They called the factory. She'd left on time. They called her friends. No one had seen her. At 10 p.m., they called the police. The police took a report. But they weren't particularly concerned. Teenage girls run away sometimes. She probably went to a friend's house. She'll come home, but Junko's parents knew better. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. They spent the night searching. Calling hospitals. Checking with anyone who might know where she was. They had no idea that at that exact moment, their daughter was being held in a house less than 10 miles away, and she would be there for 44 days. The 4 boys who kidnapped Junko were not strangers. They were from the same area. They knew of her. And they had been planning this. The ringleader was Hiroshi Miyano. He was 18 years old. A member of a local Yakuza-affiliated gang. Not a full Yakuza member, but connected. A wannabe. A thug. Miyano had asked Junko out previously. She'd rejected him. Politely. But firmly. He didn't take it well. The other 3 were Joe Ogura, 17, Shinji Minato, 16, and Yasushi Watanabe, 17. All of them were involved in petty crime. Theft. Assault. They fancied themselves tough. Powerful. In reality, they were cowards. On November 25th, they put their plan into action. Miyano had been watching Junko's routine for weeks. He knew when she finished work. He knew her route home. The plan was simple and cruel. Shinji Minato would ride his bicycle ahead of Junko. At a predetermined spot, he would pretend to be hit by a random stranger. Miyano, Junko would stop. She was kind. She'd want to help. That's when they'd grab her. It worked exactly as planned. When Junko stopped to help what she thought was an injured boy, Miyano and the others surrounded her. They pushed her into a warehouse. They threatened her. They told her they were Yakuza. They told her they knew where she lived. Where her family lived. If she screamed, they'd kill her parents. She was terrified. 17 years old. Surrounded by 4 older boys. Boys claiming gang connections. And then they took her to Minato's house. Shinji Minato lived with his parents in Adachi, Tokyo. A residential neighborhood. Ordinary houses. Families. Children playing in the streets, and that's where they held Junko. For 44 days, in Minato's bedroom. In a house with his parents living upstairs. You might be wondering, how? How did his parents not know? They knew. Minato told his parents that Junko was his girlfriend. That she'd run away from home and needed a place to stay. He begged them to let her stay. His parents agreed. They saw her. They heard things. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't ask questions. They didn't call police. Why? According to later testimony, they were afraid of their son. He was violent. Abusive. They were scared of him and his friends, and more than that, they were afraid of the Yakuza connection. If these boys were connected to organized crime, calling the police could bring retaliation, so they did nothing, and Junko suffered. I'm not going to describe in detail what happened during those 44 days. This isn't necessary. The court records exist. They're public. They're horrific. What you need to understand is this: Junko Furuta was subjected to torture that is almost incomprehensible in its cruelty. Physical. Psychological. Sexual. Constant. The 4 boys treated her as less than human. As an object. As entertainment. And they weren't alone, they invited friends over. Other boys from their school. From their gang. To assault her. To participate. Over the 44 days, more than 100 people came to that house. They saw Junko. Many of them assaulted her. All of them knew she was being held against her will. Not one called the police. The boys even forced Junko to call her parents. To tell them she'd run away. That she was safe. That she didn't want to come home. Her parents didn't believe it. They knew their daughter. They knew she would never run away, but the police did nothing. A runaway case. Not a priority. Junko tried to escape twice. The first time, she managed to get to a phone. She called the police. But before she could give her location, Minato's parents disconnected the call. They told her if she tried again, the boys would kill her family. The second time, she made it to the front door. But the boys caught her. And they punished her severely. After that, she stopped trying. She was too weak. Too broken. Neighbors heard screaming. Constantly. Day and night. They complained to each other about the noise. They wondered what was happening in that house, but no one called the police. This is a phenomenon criminologists call the bystander effect. When everyone assumes someone else will take action. When responsibility is diffused across a crowd, but this wasn't strangers on a street ignoring a mugging. This was weeks. Months. Over 100 people. Multiple opportunities, and still, nothing. By early January 1989, Junko was barely alive. She was severely malnourished. Covered in injuries. In and out of consciousness. On January 4th, the boys were playing mahjong. A tile game. Junko, barely able to move, somehow managed to beat Mayano in a game. He was furious. How dare she beat him? He and the others attacked her. For hours, at some point during that attack, Junko Furuta died. She was 17 years old. She'd been held for 44 days. The boys panicked. They'd gone too far. She was dead. Now what? They stuffed her body into a 55-gallon drum. They filled it with concrete. They transported it to a construction site in Koto, Tokyo. And they dumped it. Then they went home. For 3 weeks, Junko's body remained in that drum on the construction site. Her parents were still searching. Still calling police. Still hoping. The police were still treating it as a runaway case. And then, on January 23, 1989, something unrelated happened that would break the case open. Joe Ogura, one of the 4 boys, got into a fight. An altercation over a gambling dispute. He severely beat another boy. The victim's family called police. The police investigated. They questioned Ogura, and Ogura, trying to intimidate the police, hinted that he'd done much worse things. He'd disposed of a body. He wasn't afraid of them. The police didn't believe him at first. But they kept questioning, and eventually, Shinji Minato, under pressure, confessed. Not to protect anyone. Not out of remorse. He was scared. He thought he could get a lighter sentence if he cooperated. On January 23rd, police raided the Minato house. They arrested all 4 boys, Hiroshi Mayano, Joe Ogura, Shinji Minato, and Yasushi Watanabe. The boys led police to the construction site. To the concrete drum. When police opened it and found Junko's body, hardened detectives wept. They'd never seen anything like it. The condition of her body told a story of prolonged, systematic torture. The autopsy revealed she had died from traumatic shock. Her body had simply given up. Multiple organ failure. Malnutrition. Injuries too severe to survive. The medical examiner noted that Junko had likely been in unimaginable pain for weeks before her death, but she'd survived 44 days. 44 days of horror. And she'd never stopped hoping someone would save her. When police informed Junko's parents, her mother collapsed. Her father couldn't speak. They'd been searching for 60 days. And now they knew. Their daughter had been less than 10 miles away the entire time, being tortured. Calling for help. Hoping someone would come, and no one did. The trials began in July 1990. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence. Confessions. Physical evidence. Testimony from some of the 100 people who'd been to the house. The 4 boys were charged with kidnapping, confinement, rape, murder. The prosecution asked for severe sentences. This was one of the most heinous crimes in modern Japanese history. But there was a problem. A massive problem that would define this case and spark nationwide outrage. 3 of the 4 boys were legally juveniles at the time of the crime. Under Japanese law, juveniles are treated very differently than adults. Their identities are protected. Their names cannot be published. Their sentences are capped. Only Hiroshi Miyano, who was 18, would be tried as an adult. The trials were closed to the public to protect the minors' identities, and the sentences, when they came, shocked Japan. Hiroshi Miyano, 18 at time of crime, tried as adult. Sentenced to 17 years in prison, reduced on appeal to 13 to 16 years, records vary. Released in 2009, Joe Ogura, 17 at time of crime, tried as juvenile, sentenced to 5 to 9 years in juvenile detention. Released in 1999, Shinji Minato, 16 at time of crime, tried as juvenile, sentenced to 5 to 7 years in juvenile detention. Released in 1999, Yasushi Watanabe, 17 at time of crime, tried as juvenile, sentenced to 5 to 7 years in juvenile detention. Released in 1999, let me repeat that, for kidnapping, confining, torturing, and murdering a 17-year-old girl over 44 days. The longest sentence was 17 years, the shortest was 5 years. When the sentences were announced, the courtroom erupted. Junko's mother screamed. Her father had to be restrained. Outside the courthouse, protests began. Thousands of people holding signs. Justice for Junko. Change the law. Protect our children. The outrage spread nationwide. News coverage was relentless. But because of juvenile protection laws, the media couldn't publish the boys' names or photos, so people started digging. Finding information. Leaking it, and once the internet became widespread in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the perpetrators' identities were everywhere. Their names. Their new identities. Their addresses. Vigilante justice became a constant threat. The boys had to change their names multiple times. Move constantly. Live in hiding. But it gets worse. In 2004, Joe Ogura was arrested again. He'd kidnapped and assaulted a man. Beat him severely. Same pattern. Same violence. He'd been free for only 5 years and he'd already reoffended. He was sentenced to 7 years. Released in 2011, today, all 4 men are free. They're in their 50s now. Living somewhere in Japan under assumed names, and Junko Furuta remains in a grave in Misato. She never got to graduate. Never got to work in the music industry. Never got to live. She was 17 years old. The Junko Furuta case changed Japan. In 2000, Japan passed new laws regarding juvenile offenders. The age at which juveniles could be tried as adults was lowered from 16 to 14 for serious crimes. Maximum sentences for juveniles were increased from 15 years to 20 years. Victim rights were expanded. Families could now participate more actively in trials. They could give impact statements, but many argued it wasn't enough. The boys who killed Junko were already free. And the new laws still protected juvenile offenders' identities. The case also sparked a national conversation about something deeper. Something uncomfortable. How did over 100 people know and do nothing? Criminologists and sociologists studied the case. They identified several factors. 1. The bystander effect. When responsibility is diffused across many people, individuals feel less personal obligation to act. Someone else will call the police. 2. Fear of Yakuza retaliation. Miyano had claimed gang connections. In Japan, fear of Yakuza is real. People don't want to get involved. 3. Cultural emphasis on not causing trouble. Japanese culture values harmony, non-confrontation. Getting involved in others' business is sometimes seen as inappropriate. 4. Disbelief. Some people who went to the house later claimed they thought it was consensual. That Junko was Minato's girlfriend. That she wanted to be there. This is victim blaming at its worst. But it's also a psychological defense mechanism. It's easier to believe a lie than to accept you witnessed horror and did nothing, but none of these explanations are excuses. Over 100 people saw a girl being held captive, being tortured, being destroyed, and not one called police, even Minato's parents. They lived in the same house. They heard the screams. They saw her injuries. They were later charged with minor offenses for harboring criminals. They received small fines, that was it. A fine. For allowing their son to hold a girl captive in their house for 44 days. That was it. A fine. For allowing their son to hold a girl captive in their house for 44 days, Junko's parents filed civil suits against the perpetrators and the Minato family. They won. They were awarded compensation, but money doesn't bring back their daughter. Junko's mother, Junko Furuta, visits her daughter's grave regularly. Even now, 35 years later, the grave is maintained by the Furuta family and by strangers. People who never met Junko but were moved by her story, they leave flowers, toys, letters, apologies. We're sorry we didn't save you, we won't forget you, your story matters. The Junko Furuta case asks us impossible questions. How do we balance justice with rehabilitation for juvenile offenders? If someone commits horrific crimes at 16 or 17, do they deserve a second chance? Can people change? The Japanese legal system says yes. These were children. Damaged, broken children. But children nonetheless, they served their time. They were released. They deserve to move on, but what about Junko? What about her family? What about the other victims these men might create? Joe Ogura already reoffended. Who's to say the others won't? And what about the 100 people who knew and did nothing? They faced no legal consequences. They walked away. They lived their lives. Do they think about Junko? Do they regret their silence, or have they convinced themselves that it wasn't their responsibility? The Junko Furuta case is a mirror. And what it reflects is uncomfortable. It shows us that evil doesn't just come from the people who commit atrocities. It comes from the people who witness them and look away. It comes from systems that prioritize the rights of perpetrators over the rights of victims. It comes from cultures that value harmony over justice. Silence over intervention. Junko Furuta was 17 years old. She was kind. She was hardworking. She had dreams. And she died alone. In a house full of people. In a neighborhood full of people. In a world full of people who knew something was wrong, and did nothing. Her grave is in Sakurada Josui Park in Misato. It's peaceful. Quiet. Her family visits often. On her gravestone, there's a message: rest in peace, Junko. You are not forgotten. The Junko Furuta case is a wound that never healed for Japan. A reminder of the worst of humanity and the failures of justice. This is Case Unknown. Where we don't just investigate crimes, we investigate the systems that fail to prevent them. And the questions that haunt us long after the trials end. If this case affected you, I understand. Resources for trauma support are in the description. Junko's story matters because it forces us to ask, would we have called the police? Would we have acted? Or would we have assumed someone else would? If you believe this story needed to be told, subscribe. We cover cases that demand uncomfortable conversations. Next episode on Case Unknown, we return to the digital world. But this time, we're looking at a crime that happened in plain sight on social media. And the internet detectives who solved it before police could. Until then, remember, the unknown is only unknown until someone asks the right questions. Rest in peace, Junko Furuta. This is Case Unknown.